We're going to talk about social presence in the course. Why are we talking about social presence? We're talking about social presence because of isolation. People in online courses frequently feel isolated because they don't see their classmates or their instructor. Um, Social presence is an attempt to describe what occurs in computer-mediated communication and suggests ways in which we can try to reduce the isolation that one experiences. Isolation has been linked to poorer performance in online classes, and we don't want you to feel isolated. So here's a definition of social presence. I say a definition because the concept goes back to 1976, and there have been many definitions presented. The definition we're going to use is the ability of people to project their personal characteristics into the community, thereby presenting themselves to other participants as real people. And this is from the Community of Inquiry framework. You can look this up online. There's a great deal of information. We're using this definition because it's probably the most widely used definition at this point in time. So in essence, it's social presence is your attempt to present yourself as a real person, and also to understand and to recognize that the people behind the keyboard on the other end are also real people. Social presence has to do with two concepts, immediacy and interactivity. For immediacy, you have physiological and psychological immediacy. And physically, there's a huge amount of psychological immediacy involved. You have a lot of cues that you can see, as well as vocal inflections, and as well as what the person is saying. As this physiological distance increases, the psychological distance increases as well, and so you have to make up for that. And we're going to try to do that through the use of social presence indicators or behaviors. And the other item is also interactivity. It's how often you interact and how you interact with each other. And I'll talk about this a little bit later on in the presentation. There are three categories in the social presence framework. There's affective, interactive, and cohesive. These are the three categories that we'll be looking at. The first category is the affective category, and that consists of paralanguage, which are emoticons, smiley faces, frowny faces, emotion, use of emotion, descriptive words to indicate your feelings, use of value, so expressing personal values or beliefs, using humor, so teasing, cajoling, irony, sarcasm, using understatements. A word of caution here, it's very difficult to understand humor in text-based environments. And so if you use humor, you may want to attach an emoticon to the humor, or if you're using sarcasm, you may say that you're being sarcastic or that you're understating something. And finally, there's self-disclosure, which is sharing personal information or expressing vulnerabilities. These are typically course related, but they can also go outside of the course. For instance, you might express vulnerability saying that you had difficulty teaching a specific topic, or that you had vulnerabilities understanding course topics. These affective indicators increase the social presence, and these are behaviors that you can try to include in your posts in order to increase that social presence and reduce that psychological immediacy. The next category is the interactive category. That consists of acknowledgement, so referring to others' messages, like quoting or referencing. So you may quote John's post, or you may also say, well, John was saying X, and that would be acknowledging other people. That increases the sense of immediacy. Agreeing and disagreeing. Agreeing is something that people will very readily do. They'll less readily disagree. I encourage you to disagree if you actually disagree with the point. If a person is making a point with which you don't agree, politely disagree using hedges. So you might say, I can understand how you see it this way, but, and go on with your disagreement. Acknowledge the person's point and then hedge into your disagreement. The use of approval is an interactive category or indicator. That's offering praise or encouragement, and typically this is to someone's post. So you may say you did a really nice job summarizing the material, or you can encourage the person that way. You can also encourage thoughts. Invitation is asking questions or otherwise inviting responses. So, and it's simply that you ask a question. You invite the discussion to continue, because what we're having is we're having discussions in these discussion forums, and it's a back and forth between two people. You posting something, somebody responding, and then nothing ever happening again really isn't much of a discussion. So what you want to do is you want to invite each other to respond to each other's posts and continue that discussion. Offering personal advice. That's another interactive indicator. And this is more course related, and it might be how to do something, like it might be how to format your journal entry or your discussion post. It might be giving personal advice on how to find more information, say using Google Scholar. This can also step outside of the course. You might give personal advice on how to do something within a classroom, for instance. These are the interactive indicators, and here again, using these types of behaviors in your posts theoretically leads to the reduction of that psychological distance. The last category is the cohesive category. That's bonding together as individuals and as a class. These consist of greetings, salutations, and closures. So saying hello and saying goodbye within your post. Use of vocatives, which are addressing classmates by name. So you might say, hi, John. And that personalizes the discussion message a little bit more than just launching into what you have to say. Group references. We are a class, and as you identify yourself as a class, you typically will have greater social presence. So if you think of it as the class as being a we or an us or an our, that might assist you in avoiding these feelings of isolation. Social sharing. This is typically information unrelated to the course, and this isn't something that you can't do within a post. You can share social information. To encourage social sharing, I have created a chat section or a chat area for continued outside discussions. I invite you to use those. I probably won't check on them very often. I may pop in there and look, but it's not going to be as frequently as I read your discussion posts. And then lastly, of course, reflection. You can, within your discussion post, you might say this worked really well, and I like this part of the course. So reflecting on what's working in the course is also a cohesive indicator, and it allows me to know things. It allows me to make changes that are necessary. So these are cohesive indicators, and here again, like as I said, think of this as essentially glue that binds each of us into the class. Now I'm going to cover interactions. I said earlier that there are immediacy and interactivity. I'm talking about interactions and not the interactive category. In your interactions, there are a couple of pieces of advice that I have. The first is that you need to respond to others' threads. That's an interaction. So the discussion post that someone posts, you have to respond to. You literally have to, because you're responsible for responding to two other threads within the discussion. But this also means that when somebody responds to you, that you respond back. That's how you continue a discussion. I know it sounds simple, and it might even be condescending in a way, but a lot of people will just post a message and then never revisit to see if someone posted something, or never acknowledge someone else's post. This creates these feelings of isolations, and I've seen it again and again within personal journals and end of the course evaluations on how they didn't feel like it was a class because they didn't get responses. Another thing to think about when you're looking at interactions is timeliness. Respond as quickly as possible. This doesn't mean that you respond 3 hours after someone posts something. I mean, you might respond 3 hours after someone posts something, but don't let 2 or 3 days go between checking discussion posts. You should really be looking at discussion posts every single day to see whether or not someone has responded to you. The easiest way to know if someone responds to you is to subscribe to the discussion thread that you're involved in. It will instantly generate an email that's sent out to you that lets you know that, hey, look, somebody's responded to the discussion thread you're in. These will go to your University Albany emails, so make sure that you are checking your UAlbany email frequently. Another thing to do is distribute your responses. That means respond to different people. We all have the tendency to form affinity groups, or groups of like niches that we will oftentimes respond to. Those are the friends that you're making, but make an effort to respond to other people, especially if you see that somebody's conversation thread has no responses. Try to respond to those especially, because those are the people who are oftentimes going to feel isolated. Frequency. Respond as frequently as possible. This doesn't mean that you have to have 400 responses, but it does mean that you want to respond to those people who are responding to you. And you'll find that the more frequently you respond, you'll find that you're more part of a conversation and you're more part of a real authentic discussion, which is what we're shooting for. Have your interactions be natural. That means using emoticons, which are those emotions. It means sometimes less formal writing. Your initial thread is going to be a pretty formal thread, but your responses to your peers can be a little bit less formal. It still needs to be academic language. You wouldn't use the word stuff, for instance, as some generalized term. You would want to give a more specific meaning of stuff. But you can use a little bit less academic writing within your responses to people, and that makes it a little bit more formal. That also makes it'll also make it a little closer psychologically. So those are the suggestions for the interactions. In this slide, I just offer other advice. These are things that people have done in the past that have seemed to work. The first one is to ask your questions in bold. I would ask a question at the end of your initial post because that's going to invite conversation, so that's one of the suggestions that's not listed here. But ask your questions in bold. If you're responding to another person's post and you have questions, ask them. Put them in bold, that way a person can see very quickly, oh look, there's a question here, I should respond to it. Respond to each other's questions if they ask them to you. That's definitely something that you want to do. That's that interactivity that you want to go for. Leave a post somewhat open to invite responses. That means you can cover everything in your initial post. As long as you ask a question, you're probably going to get a response. But oftentimes you don't get a response in initial post because you've covered everything, which is fine by me. You've learned a lot by covering everything. If you don't ask that question, though, you might not get a response. If you leave it a little bit open to invite responses, like if you don't cover everything, people might be more prone to respond as well. Personally, you need to set a discussion schedule. I suggest that you check discussions or attempt to check discussions every day. You might only be able to check out every other day. But set a discussion schedule where you sit down and this is your discussion time to have with your classmates. That's a very important thing to do. If you're just checking randomly, you're going to notice that these discussions just pile up. I check discussions every single morning, and I read every discussion that's posted. I may not respond to many discussion posts because that tends to kill a thread, but you'll notice that I'll refer to it, and I'll refer to things in your self-assessment more often. But I will check it every single day, the discussion threads, when I wake up typically. Share your experiences. If you have experiences that are successful or unsuccessful within the classroom, share those experiences with your peers. That's going to make it far more personable, of course. You're going to find that you get more responses, that you feel more intellectually and affectively engaged, and you're going to see that these experiences, when it's all said and done, have helped out the discussion greatly. Give informed opinions, which what I mean by this is research-backed opinions. I don't mind someone giving an opinion, but make sure that it has some research backing to it. That's the one stickler that I am on about that I have. I cringe when I see someone say that everyone has internet connection because it's not true. Do some fact checking before you make these really global generalizations. Digital natives, when people say, oh, every child is a digital native, I kind of cringe because they've missed an entire battery of literature that refutes the concept of digital natives versus digital immigrants. So give informed opinions. It's okay to give your own opinion, but make sure that it's accurate. And the last thing is to be patient. Don't expect someone to respond to your post in 2 hours. Don't expect someone to respond to your email in 2 hours. I typically will respond to emails within a few hours, unless it's after 5 p.m., in which case you probably won't hear back from me until the next morning. My hours are typically from 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, until about 5 o'clock p.m. That's the time frame that I'm online, looking at all the works and all of the discussions. But be patient with your classmates. Sometimes unforeseen events occur in their life and they can't respond back within that 24-hour time period or 48-hour time period. Be patient with the responses, and your expectations won't be let down, and you'll feel, here again, more of a part of a course. Ultimately, in the discussions, we want to have just that, discussions. We want to back and forth between people on ideas, and we want to be building critical thinking and cognitive presence, and just this cognition about the topics that we're discussing. We don't just want to throw out information and run away. We want to discuss this information. It is reflective of sociocultural frameworks and shared cognition and metacognition. So these are things that we want to do in order to have good discussions. You want to increase your social presence as much as possible so you feel part of the course. If you're inactive in the course, you're not going to feel part of the course. You're going to feel isolated. So here again, my advice is to be as active as you can in the discussions and in the course. You'll find in the end that you feel like it was more of a real course and that you were socially present within that course. That's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, you can always email me or use the global Ask a Question section within the course. Enjoy your discussions.